So thank you guys for doing this. My intention here is twofold, I guess, and really organically let it go where it goes. But I feel like there's, in the conversations of parenting, there's a veil over this whole culture of substance where even parents are afraid to talk openly with other parents about the stuff that they're navigating with their kids. And so one of the things I want to do is really curate this conversation to hopefully stimulate more conversation among parents of students, to make it more safe, to talk with one another what they're dealing with as a parent, while at the same time not sabotaging the reputation of their kids, which is, I think, a really hard balance. And then simultaneously, I want to create a resource for students who there may be questions they may never ask or conversations they're afraid to have with the likes of any of you four and your expertise, to again give them an initial step toward resources and perspectives that may be helpful for them as they navigate the hallways of their own middle school or high school. So that, of course, implies that substances in the high schools and the middle schools are very prevalent. And I wonder if you could speak to just how prevalent substances are in our community.
I think our community is just the same as other communities, but it's certainly prevalent in junior high and definitely in our high schools. I talked to a junior high principal, and it's not uncommon for him to arrest somebody with marijuana or somebody bringing marijuana into schools to sell to 7th, 8th, and 9th graders. So it's I don't want to call it an epidemic, but it's certainly it's out there. There's lots of different drugs in junior high and high schools right now.
I've heard non-scientific studies where people have said it's as high as 50% of, say, 8th graders in our middle schools. Is that, like, based upon what you guys do?
Nationally, it's hung around 33%
Okay.
of kids who use on a regular basis. That doesn't mean the number of kids who use. There's a lot of kids who use a few times and quit, but as far as overall, there's a lot of kids who use on a regular basis. But that also says there's a lot of kids who don't use. I mean, there's a lot of good parenting out there, there's a lot of teachers who really care, and that's a real benefit to these kids. But the ones who do use, a significant number of them use a lot. I mean, I've had kids who've used up to 15 times a day.
And Judge Reynolds, dealing with the drug treatment courts, I mean, what are you seeing? When are those trends in people's lives beginning? Is there a theme to that?
I do notice in our adult treatment court program, we have a lot of people coming in at the age of 20, 22, 24 years of age, and we ask them, when did you start using? And boy, oh boy, so many of them say 12, 14, and we're not talking about marijuana use. We're not talking about the kid who's just taken a hit off of a marijuana pipe or something. We're talking about somebody who has been intravenously using meth for that period of time, and that's, so you talk about being in schools, that's the reality. I would say the majority of our people in our adult treatment court started using in their early to mid-teens.
And Jenny, I know working at Shodare, you come at it from the mental health side, the mental illness side. So
Yeah.
what's the connection to the prevalence of substance abuse from your perspective and the prevalence of mental illness in the schools?
I think what we know is that about 1 in 5 kids shows signs of a mental illness. And of those kids, we know that only about 80%, or we know that 80% of them will not receive help through a therapist or through a physician. And so it just makes me wonder where are they, how are they coping? Where are they receiving that help? And if you really drill down on Montana, we know that 8.9% of our high school students have attempted to complete suicide. So actually had a plan and made an attempt. And we know that about 18% of high school students have seriously considered completing suicide. And so I look at it from, if those difficult emotions are present, right? How are kids navigating those? And I think substance abuse is just one way to avoid them. And if we don't open a conversation up about how to build resilience and about how to navigate those emotions, I think we're going to continue down this road.
So it seems like there's a conversation towards prevention and just encouraging our kids to never use, and there's a conversation that deals with what do we do when we find out our kid has taken a hit off a pipe or whatever that looks like. What are the things from your respective spheres of influence and expertise, what are the successful things we can do as parents that help discourage use and prevent use?
I think the most important thing parents can do is become educated. They need to learn what this whole system is about. They need to be aware it's a crisis, but it might not be a crisis in their own home, but it could be a crisis with somebody they know. There's a lot of resources out there for education, but most of it's online. We've talked about different groups, parent support groups, that kind of stuff, but most parents don't want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about what's going on at home. It's a secret they want to keep in their homes, especially in homes that have addicts. I mean, the children who grow up in a home with an addict have a 90% chance of becoming addicted themselves. Their choice is to use or not use. If they use, they're probably going to follow suit. So parents need to learn as much as they possibly can about what's going on with the drug culture, with the friends of their kids, with the settings they're in, and get involved that way. I think education is the key. It's not the only thing.
I've been to a lot of narcotics conferences, and probably the most important thing I heard last year was back in the day when marijuana was the gateway drug, THC levels were really low, 2 to 3%. And that was coined the gateway drug. And he really brought it to my attention that young kids today, they're bypassing the gateway drug marijuana, and they're going online and they're legally ordering hard stimulants. So their very first introduction into a drug is not the 2 or 3% THC that we used to do. And when they're introducing themselves for the very first time to a heavy stimulant, man, that's when we're starting to see the methamphetamine use, and then now we're seeing heroin is just crazy in Helena. So,
And I think prescription pills are overlooked. One of the biggest problems we have nationwide is heroin. And heroin starts with a family medicine cabinet or grandparents' medicine cabinet or a friend's parents' medicine cabinet, and they go through it and they find pills, and they go to a party, they put all the pills in a bowl, and they start taking pills. And if they like what they found, if they like what they did, they continue that. If it scares them, they might stop, which is kind of a good thing. But in that process, kids die, kids get addicted, families crash and burn. And kids don't start with heroin, they start with pills.
It's strange to me though, like, and maybe I'm alone, but I graduated 8th grade having literally never been offered anything. And I didn't grow up in any great upper class suburbia by any means. So part of what's occurring to me in this conversation, even leading up to this, is that those days are gone, that our kids going to HMS and C.R. Anderson and Helena High and Capitol, it's not if, it's when. I think that's one of the things driving me in this conversation is, okay, therefore, how do I help my kids and how do we help our kids know that's a reality? I mean, you're going to have to learn to navigate substances, like you're going to have to learn to navigate a smartphone.
a parent's reaction, I think that is so crucial. The day you find out, how you react is going to dictate how your relationship's going to go with that child. If I catch my kid doing something wrong, I don't think we as parents realize how much they feel that they disappointed us as a parent. And if we keep hammering them on how bad you disappointed us, then that relationship just spreads farther and farther apart.
Right.
And I think somebody made a good point. We don't want to talk about it. Our kid doesn't do drugs. Our kid, gets good grades. And when it's in the family, nobody wants to talk about it.
The relationship is the key with parents and children. If you have a good relationship, they go to school, somebody offers them something, they'll come home and tell you. They'll come home and talk about it. That might change the older they get, in the later teen years, but if you build that relationship from the beginning and work through it, you're going to have a much better chance of dealing with it when it pops up, when it comes up, whether they just heard about it, whether somebody's offered it to them, whether they start using. In any of those scenarios, if you have that relationship built with your child, they're going to talk to you as long as you're open to talk to them. I mean, you have to be there for them. You have to be aware when they do talk to you. You don't panic and you don't run off and call the cops. You don't. That's one of the first things. Well, maybe we'll just call the cops this time. And you think, if you want to break a relationship down instantly, you do that. And it's not that police are bad. It's just that the kids see them as that.
When we went to school a long time ago, there was a lot of peer pressure, but we didn't have social media, we didn't have the electronics, we didn't have, it's incredible what my 16-year-old daughter goes through at the high school, just the peer pressure. If they don't have a parent to come home and talk to, then, I mean, that's pretty dangerous.
Just be involved with your kids, know what they're doing, know who they're hanging out with. Get them involved in stuff. Don't give them a lot of free time. You know, our expectation with our kids is they were going to do some things through school. They're going to do some things outside of school as a positive involvement. So we didn't leave them with a lot of open-ended time to where they could go out and get into mischief. Unfortunately, a lot of kids don't have that kind of a family structure.
Sure,
They
yeah.
may have a single parent who's working and just trying to pay the bills, and so they don't have that support. And then you get into the mental health issues, and I agree with what was said earlier about that. You've got kids who are using drugs because life isn't very fun for them. They're depressed, they're anxious, it's not good at home, so they're using drugs to kind of get away from that for a while.
And if you're gonna talk to your kids about drug use, make sure you do the research before, because you're not gonna outsmart a 13 or 14-year-old on marijuana unless you have all your facts down. Don't try to BS them, because they're 10 steps ahead of you, especially on marijuana. You better have all your stats down and all your statistics down, because they know more about the good part of marijuana as opposed to the bad part. And it's an argument you're not gonna win.
I think parents should seek out other parents too. I mean, because we want to keep it in our families and protect our families from the outside world, we avoid other families who probably are going through the exact same thing. And we need to reach out to other families any way we can. I think churches can provide that. There are very few resources where families can go for help as far as groups, but if they're not there, we can make them. We can find ways to do that. We can offer support groups to families, and we can start things as community members and people who are concerned and get out there and provide resources for families. I mean, we can do that. We have to step up to do that, but we can.
So Jenny, a student shows up at Show Dare who's been using, and you determine is also dealing with mental illness, and then fast forward 6 months is thriving.
Sure.
What lies between the initial moment and the success 6 months later?
There are some really tangible tools that we can use that can build emotional intelligence. I think when someone is dealing with mental health issues, the only way out is through, right? And substance use is trying to go around. So, one of the things that we've done at Show Dare is really try to build a culture where there's an emotional vocabulary. And so one of the things that we do, whether we're with a group of kids or we're with the medical director and the CEO, it doesn't matter. We start every meeting, every communication with, how are you feeling? Not how are you doing, right? But how are you feeling? And when we first started doing that, it was odd. I mean, I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how I was feeling, right? And I also didn't want to tell the truth, because I don't want to say I'm feeling, kind of disappointed, right? I didn't want to role model that to the kids. I was afraid of that at first.
Sure.
But I think the more we made that a cultural norm, the more we started paying attention to emotions, and the more we are able to role model emotional intelligence to our kids. If a kid comes down and sits next to me and says, I'm feeling really sad today, and I say, well, let's go, I want to fix it internally, right? Mm-hmm. Let's go try to fix it. I want to make you happy. What lesson have I just taught that child? And I think to me, I've effectively taught them, it's not okay to be sad. And so as parents, we really want to fix our kids' emotions, right? We really want to help them feel well. But really, it's our job to know that spectrum of emotions is universal. We all feel them, right? And so it's our job to help kids navigate those and be with them when they're sad, and just help them through it. Because if you're not going to go through it, kids, they're going to find all sorts of ways around it, right? So my suggestion is to start building that culture around, that emotional vocabulary where we can speak honestly and freely, and it's okay to feel. what we feel, right?
There is a stigma associated with drug use and with mental health issues. You know, you said parents don't want to talk about it, and that's true. We all want our parents to be perfect. We all want our families to be perfect. It doesn't happen in the real world.
Right.
And you've got to be aware that I view drug addiction, as I do mental health issues, as an illness. That your kid is sick. They're not necessarily acting bad because they want to be bad kids. They are physically have a physical and emotional problem. And so if your kid were to come to you and say, Dad, I broke my arm, would you get mad at your kid for breaking his arm? Would you belittle him or not talk about it? You would go and help your kid as much as you could. Same thing with drug addiction. You've got to be willing to help. It is, like you said, you can't dodge it. It's not going to go away. You got to deal with it head on. And so you've got to get yourself educated. You've got to get yourself involved. You've got to be willing to talk to your kid, not in an recriminating way, but in a, what can we do now to help you get past this?
Well, and I think the amount of secrecy around substance use and mental illness speaks to potentially the fact that as parents, we might have a shame response, right? So if my child is using, I might have a reaction of, I'm a terrible parent. And I'm attaching that to who I am as a person. And I'm suggesting to myself, I have this narrative in my brain that says, I'm not worthy anymore. And so I'm not going to talk about that, right? That's painful to talk about. And so I think that's one of the reasons that it's so secret, is because people feel so much shame around it. But the interesting thing about shame, too, is that it's inversely related to accountability. So, you know, if I'm not given the opportunity to own my story and be accountable to it, I'm not going to empower myself to change my circumstances. So I think shame is a really, really dangerous, it's so corrosive to relationships. It's so dangerous as we interact with each other. And I think it's a big piece of this puzzle, of this picture.
I think parents need to have the mindset, what am I going to do when my child comes home and tells me I drank alcohol or I smoked weed? Or parents need to be prepared for when that child comes home, what am I going to do? And you hit it right on the head. Our first reaction, mine was, where did I fail as a parent? Then if you don't blame yourself, you blame your wife, or you're blaming somebody, you know, rather than just saying, sitting down with your kid and talking a little bit about it. But you're going to blame yourself immediately. It would be odd if a parent doesn't blame themselves. But so I think you got to get over that and find out, get ready for that next step. It's coming, 1 out of 5 or whatever.
Right.
They're coming home. You're either going to find it on their phone or they're going to come home and tell you. So be prepared to interact in a great conversation, because a dad can blow up and then that stops that communication.
Okay, so David, I'm gonna put you on the spot. Parent finds out their son or daughter's using. What are the logical next few steps? Speaking from your substance abuse counselor background.
Talk to them. I mean, that's obviously the first thing you can do. And then if you see there's issues or there's problems beyond initial use, experimental drug use, then you need to seek professional help. You need to get out there and talk to people that know what they're doing, whether it be a treatment counselor, a mental health counselor, a teacher. There are teachers out there that are really good at this. I mean, they're really aware of what's going on in their schools. Professionals can assess your child. They can find out, do we have a real problem here? Are we at experimental use? Are we at abuse use? Or are we at addiction use? And just because you catch them, you have no clue at what level they're at. I recommend it to a lot of parents that if you think your kids are using and you're not sure, give them a UA. You can go down to your local drugstore and get a UA kit. Give them a UA. Find out if they're telling you the truth. I mean, drug courts, they give UAs. They do that because of honesty. You have to know. So sometimes you have to take the next step. Sometimes you have to wait until the system gets involved, and you might be the one doing that. But if you have that communication with your child, it makes a major difference when you run into problems. I mean, we were able to sit down. We established a rule in our house: if you went out and used, and you were somewhere where you needed a ride, call. I will come and get you anywhere you're at. I will come and pick you up. You might get grounded, but I will not lecture you. I will not harp on what's going on. We will talk. And that rule was a good rule, it was an effective rule, and it kept my children alive.
Don't lie to your kid about the extreme dangers of certain things unless you can back it up. And then maybe even get into an open debate with them, you know, as more fun. Say, prove to me why you think doing this drug is going to benefit you. Go ahead and research it, I'll research it, and let's come together. Maybe I'm missing something. But you're gonna have, I want you to sit down and prove to me in an intelligent way why you think this drug is gonna benefit you. And maybe I can prove to you in a non-confrontational way why I don't think you should be able to do it. If you put the ownership back on them a lot of times, and they can't prove it, then maybe some things will set in. But
So whether we're talking about the parents of a 2-year-old who can't even fathom the day that their kid would think about using marijuana, or we're talking about the parents of teens who are terrified at the world that they're now parenting in, what's your text message to those parents? Your Snapchat?
Snapchat. Get curious about your kids and work with other parents and work with your family to create a culture where there isn't shame around feeling emotion.
Thank you for vulnerably lending your expertise, and I'm all the more confident on the back end of this that we can spark the conversations that can lead to families and parents and students recognize the reality and hopefully find the resources. So anyway, thank you guys.